Welcome back to this episode of the Law of Relevancy podcast. I am Cordzone, your host, and today we're joined by Renee Frojo. She is the founder of A Good Reputation, a consultancy and agency focused on brand storytelling. Renee, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, this is a topic that I absolutely love. I love storytelling because it seems like it is hardwired into us and humanity. What is it about storytelling that makes it so powerful to us humans?
Mm. Well, it is the most ancient form of technology as a way to transfer ideas and information from one human to another, right? Before we had anything, we had stories. And brain studies have shown, scientists have been so interested in studying this, have shown that it lights up a different part of the parts that's responsible for memory, that's responsible for decision making. It's not the rational part of the brain, it's the part of the brain that's responsible for emotions. So it's highly engaged when we tell stories. And it's that neural coupling that actually happens when you're telling stories, right? And if you do an effective job of doing it, like movies, you actually feel like you're in the story that you're listening to or watching, right? Or reading even. It's why in horror movies, your heart actually starts beating really fast, right? Even though you're not being chased by the monster, your body doesn't know the difference because of that magical power of storytelling, to really help transfer ideas. So, it's science and art.
Well, speaking of the art side of it, I mean, storytelling has been something that I have uh, been personally drawn to over the last 2 or 3 decades, but I feel like I'm getting better and better at it all the time. It feels like I learn more and more about it.
Mm.
Where did you get plugged into what makes a good story?
Well, I started my career in journalism. And so I was telling stories and business stories in particular all day long. But I really, my career has evolved and I've really focused on more teaching storytelling and teaching brands and individuals how to harness the power of storytelling. Um, I really found that it's like anything, it is a learned skill that takes practice, right? It really takes practice. And I find every opportunity an opportunity to connect through story. So, any of my connection calls or even sales calls or meetings with new people, instead of starting with the small talk, and answering the tired questions about the weather, where you're from, like really starting with a story, transform the conversation and the connection and the intimacy of it. Um, and vulnerable storytelling is another thing. It's another layer of that, that I just the more I've done, the more I realized my business has exploded, my relationships have deepened, my opportunities have grown. It's really been, I think, one of the most powerful skills I've really learned, and I'm still learning. I'm still practicing.
When you look back on your career as a journalist and your career as an expert storyteller, can you think of one story or a couple of stories that you helped bring to life that really made a huge impact?
Ah, gosh, I told so many. Well, for whatever reason, the one that's coming to mind is, um, I broke a lot of news as a young journalist, and people were surprised because I was one of the youngest journalists at the San Francisco Business Times. And the reason I think I broke so much news is because I would just listen and ask questions and hear something that just seemed like an assumption someone was making and saying, "Does everybody know that? Is that is that widely held information?" And then dig and then be the first one to break a story. And one of them was, um, I was at a conference and someone that worked on the city board in San Francisco said, and we all know that Chinatown is dying. And I said, do we all know that Chinatown is dying? Chinatown is dying. Why is Chinatown dying? It's such an iconic historic neighborhood in San Francisco. Like, what's happening in this neighborhood? And so I went in and I started interviewing all the businesses and kind of getting to the root cause of why, quote unquote, it was dying and what was happening. And sure enough, like the businesses were all struggling. Tourists came in and out, but really didn't buy all the little trinkets. It was all like family owned businesses that were really loaning money to the next generation to kind of keep these storefronts up. And only people like really tight knit within the community realized that this was happening. And so they were trying to bring in some younger, um, creative, kind of well-known chefs and store owners within the Chinese American community to start opening like hot new restaurants in Chinatown and like bringing in, some of those like modern elements of San Francisco. And so I had this front cover piece about how Chinatown was crumbling and nobody knew about it, but all these efforts were underway internally to revive it and make sure that the Chinatown that San Francisco is known for becomes a destination once again. So I don't know why that story was the one that came up, but maybe it was one of my prouder stories because I feel like no one was paying attention to it, and it became a really big story. And I also was into photography to take some really
Oh, but
fun
those are the best
photos.
pictures.
Yeah,
Yeah.
accompanied it. Hmm.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things that sort of caught my attention. Like one of them was as a journalist, like how can we look at the world a little bit more like a journalist? Like when you said, "Do we know that Chinatown
Hmm.
town town is dying?" Like those are the types of things where you just don't it doesn't seem like you just accepted it as fact.
Right.
Like you had a certain disposition that keyed you into this next step where you're gonna actually go talk to the people and you're gonna dig in.
Yeah.
It seems like that's a really valuable and powerful listening skill. Like how do we emulate what you're doing in that situation?
And it's two things. It's really honing your curiosity and your noticing skills, right? Being more curious and looking up from your phone and noticing the world around you and noticing the conversations that are happening and questioning it. I'm leading a storytelling cohort right now, and that's the area that we were just in. Is before you can really even develop a storytelling practice, you have to develop a noticing practice. And one of my favorite noticing practices, one that I've implemented and started to do, is called homework for life. And it comes from Matthew Dix. Do you know him? He's a really well known storyteller. He's won like multiple The Moth Grand Slams and now is um, he coaches executives and brands on how to become better storytellers. And his practice, homework for life, is not journaling. It's literally taking 5 minutes at the end of every day to note down something. If you had to tell a 5 minute story from that day, what would it be? And so you get into this practice of noticing what makes a story. And a story is something that reframed your thinking, that taught you something new, that made you realize something for the first time. It's a change, right? It's like a slight change or a shift. And it can be the most subtle mindset shift that happened. People say sentences or books don't change lives, sentences change lives, right? It's like you could read one thing that can just completely unlock a new way of thinking for you that can change everything. And that's the subtlety in the story, too. That's in a good story. And so when you start doing that every day, you're not writing the whole story. You're literally writing down some things to like jog your memory. You start noticing things that would have just passed you by. And you start making meaning out of things that otherwise are just like a series of events that happened in a day, right? So I think storytelling is really just making meaning and noticing the subtle shifts and changes that are happening every day because that I ultimately that is what we do. Otherwise we're just going through life and things are happening to us. But if we don't connect the dots on why those things are happening to us and how it's changing us and how we're evolving, then we're missing so much meaning.
Yeah, what you just said, the reframed your thinking, like, I can think through a day or a moments where, like, I noticed something made me consider something out there in the wild or, something out there like differently.
Mhm.
But with you just saying it, like that's a muscle that I need to work
Mhm. Mhm.
because like if I am actually like triggering like a flag somewhere, it's like, oh wow, like I just learned something. It seems like those moments are great stories because you're going in with context,
Mhm.
you're noticing something that is shifting, which educates you or whatever, but it makes you look at something differently. And it's almost like our brains are wired for that because of our survival instincts and whatnot, and wanting to learn from others around us. But like just that recognition that something is different,
Mm.
that's definitely a muscle that I'm gonna try to work from now on. I mean,
Mhm.
just the way that you broke it down, it makes a lot of sense.
Mhm. Yeah, and it really then all of a sudden you find you just have an overabundance of stories to tell once you start doing that. And also, like, on a like, a just a deeper life level, you have so much more meaning in your life. You start noticing, like, the days go by slower because you've been able to capture them, or you've been able to capture the essence of what made that day memorable, right? Or what made that day worth living. So, I think it's one of the for me, it's been one of the most transformative practices, for my life and my business and to become a better storyteller.
So now that you're practiced doing this, like how do you apply it with clients? Like when a client comes to you, and they are interested in being better at storytelling, like how does that process work?
We break it down. First, we have to figure out, what their goals are for their business, and then how they're going about ultimately, I'm using marketing storytelling right now as a marketing tool, right, to help, both individual business owners, service-based business owners, and brands, uh, grow, get visibility, stand out from the crowd, and, the thing about the work that we do, like, even you and I and agency owners, is it's commoditized, right? It is just there's so many people doing the same thing with a similar level of expertise, right? So how do you stand out? And you were telling me earlier that yours has all been through relationship building, right? Through referral building, and that's been your bread and butter. And I think a lot of people rely on that as well. When you want to do that a little bit more at scale, a lot of people are taking to online, marketing, networking to do that. The only way that you're standing out is through your unique point of view, your experiences, your relatability, um, really, in how you show up online. It's broken down. Credibility and how people judge credibility is a mixture of warmth and competence. And so some people, a lot of people, and a lot of what you see online right now is a bunch of people just showing how competent they are, right? And they're experts, experting all the time, all over the place, right? And they're missing that critical warmth piece, that relatability, that trust piece. And you do that by sharing more of yourself beyond, you know, what problem you solve and how you solve it, but like why you and what you're like to work with and why now and what's your perspective on the world and does it match my perspective on the world? Are our values aligned, right? Are you ultimately the person that I want to work with and hire? And I would say that's where that journalism, thinking more like a journalist piece comes in too. I teach people to, instead of being the expert, be a little bit more of the explorer and curious and seeing what like capturing what they notice and then putting their unique perspective or spin on it. um it's a really effective and it's a really effective approach. And I honestly think it's kind of the only approach that's really going to work going forward, to differentiate. So yeah. I,
I've never heard that term. I've never heard that term experting, but it perfectly describes what you see online. It's like you've got these, a lot of times they're like these bros that are experting all over the place, and they're super confident about what they're teaching,
Mhm.
and you're not exactly sure where they gained this experience or
Mhm.
whatnot, but they're super confident in it. So much so that you're it's like they're projecting that they've got it all figured out.
Mhm.
But in reality, like, none of us have it figured out, and, like, me working with somebody, I mean, we work in a very, very fast changing world, and, like,
Mhm.
I wanna work with somebody that is very curious, adaptable,
Mm.
um, you said warm, like, how do you project warmness online? Like, I'm super curious about that.
I think this is where a little bit of the vulnerability piece comes in. Projecting warmth is essentially just talking openly about yourself, your experiences, your struggles, your realizations, right? Your transformations. And I use Pixar's 22 Rules of Storytelling to teach how to use some of those aspects in storytelling for marketing. And one of them is you admire a character more for trying than for winning, right? And it's easier to bring people along for the ride when you're building in public and showing what you're overcoming because it's a source of inspiration, hope, and education. You're learning vicariously through that person. So I think that is one way to express warmth online is just taking down the facade a little bit and being open. And it's a hard thing to do because um you're exposing yourself to the world wide web. You're exposing yourself to potentially thousands of people. And that feels really scary, right? We're afraid of being misunderstood or misconstrued or taken out of context. And all that is valid. Um, but I've really been exploring like what happens when that happens. And looking for people's stories who have either gone viral for something and then been quote unquote canceled or gotten a lot of flack for you know unintentionally pissing someone off or offending somebody, right? And I've reached out to those people and I've said what happened, and I've experienced it myself too. There's this um, let me finish that thread. I've asked what happened, right? And they said, well, the self-aware ones, I learned from my mistake. And I then talked about that online, where I misstepped, how I'm thinking about it. And that just builds so much more trust and credibility because you're showing that you're able to admit your mistakes. You're able to learn from them. You're a thoughtful, you know, introspective person who is taking feedback and criticism and doing something with it, right? And not just being reactive or disappearing altogether. So, if anything, I think those opportunities, should they happen, the ones that we're most afraid of, can be more opportunities to just show, why you're awesome, or like why you're the
Yeah.
person someone would want to work with or hire. It's a little bit different on a brand level, but brands aren't getting as personal. There's a lot of opportunities for really good storytelling with brands, but what I'm talking about here is individuals and personal branding. It's a
Can
different
you
level
think of any
mhm,
can you think of any brands that are doing a particularly good job right now?
of storytelling.
Yeah,
Um,
like, think, like a B2C brand.
a B2C brand of yeah, I mean, so many. Patagonia comes to mind. They've always been excellent storytellers, and so driven by their mission and their purpose, right? That they bring you in. They make you believe in the future that they want to be part of and be part of that movement. And they do that through a lot of individual stories, highlighting partners. Um, but I'm trying to think of ones that are like really uh,
I love
mhm.
Did you ever get to see the Yeti black and white videos they used to do where they would take somebody that, would use Yeti coolers, but it might be somebody that quail hunts or they fish, and they talk about just the struggle of, like, being that charter guide or whatever, and it just they do a really good job of, like, cutting to the core of like the durability of the person, and it infers that onto the product itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So anyhow, those I was fanboying over some of those for the last like dozen years or so, but those are some of my favorite stories. Now you said you had a personal story.
Oh, about it. Yes. Well, recently on LinkedIn, I saw a bunch of people who I admire, have built relationships with, getting featured in this Reddit group, the subreddit group called LinkedIn Lunatics. I don't know if you're familiar with this group, but it's got, I think, near almost a million followers, subscribers, whatever they're called on Reddit, like 800,000, something like that. And it is literally a maybe hate is a strong group, but word. It's a group for showcasing people on LinkedIn who are quote unquote lunatics, like totally crazy author rocker, making fun of them, shaming them,
Yeah.
and just publicly taking them down. And while I don't disagree, some of it is very funny.
Yeah.
And I agree with some of the things that are maybe they find distasteful or cringy or whatever it is. But I started seeing people who I know are really good people, thoughtful people, have successful businesses, start getting featured on there. And it's just, when you get into the comments, it's just really nasty. And I think I was afraid of landing myself on there, and so I just poked the hornet's nest. And in retrospect, this is what I'm like now psychoanalyzing myself. I was
Sure.
like, I
I
think
can't
I
wait to
was
hear what
so
happened.
afraid that I was like, "Ding." And I did this post that went viral about how I just don't understand why this thing exists in this way and why we feel the need. Like, it's already so hard to put yourself out there, to be exposed, to try to make a human connection by showing more of yourself. And it's made even harder by groups like this that then take that and put it on a public platform and shame you for trying, right? And even if you disagree with what they find distasteful. And I landed myself a spot with that post, right? There's so many people that agreed with me, that came out of the woodworks, but also people are like, you just don't understand why this exists. And you're now shaming this group of people for how they're going about doing things or what
I
they
don't
do
know. I think
differently,
it's a
right?
double negative. I don't
It,
think you can get in trouble for shaming the shamers.
that
Like it's
well, that's
weird.
an argument. Yeah.
It's weird. It's weird how this dynamic even exists because like I'm a big believer in like Dale Carnegie,
Hmm.
and like the first rule is don't criticize, condemn, and complain. And it's just like when you think about like what kind of energy it takes to be an asshole online,
Yeah.
it's like it's the worst energy,
I
and you've got to feel like crap doing it and talking about people. It must just you must live a miserable life
that's the
to like
assumption.
spend your time coming up with like I don't know, bullying people who are just you know,
Yeah.
trying to grind, you know?
I mean, I agree with you, but I think what I was doing then is I was shaming a group of people who have come together and found some sort of solace in each other, right? So this is
Okay.
something that they believe in, they're together, and I'm sitting here then criticizing that without maybe fully understanding it. And so, I got featured. People really dug into me and my profile, and I stopped reading the comments because it was hurtful. Um, and But it wasn't that bad because I know I'm like this. Even some of the comments are just, they weren't
Maybe they feel
intelligent.
like
I was like, all right, this like a 13-year-old teenage boy, doing this behind his computer. My boyfriend asked me, he was like, so was it as bad as you thought? I was like, it was. I'm okay.
yeah.
I'm okay. And then I wrote, a follow up to it afterwards saying, maybe my approach to how I called it out, I still don't agree with the practice, but like the way I went about it wasn't, I was kind of doing the same thing that I was criticizing. And so it was an opportunity again, like I was mentioning.
Mm. Well, at least you can utilize that resource as a to illustrate the antithesis of that warmth that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
You
that's
know, it's
true.
like, here's what not to do. Like, we're the Siskel and Ebert of the, LinkedIn influencers, you
Yeah,
know, we're judging. So here's what to avoid, you know?
yeah,
So, at least you can use it that way.
for sure. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So, like, I love, adversity is one of my favorite words because it teaches us so much. So, how have you changed following following that episode?
Following that episode, I think I just tried to be a little bit more if I am gonna criticize, if I am going to state my strongly held opinion on something that I believe is wrong or bad, or I make sure to, fully do my research.
Mhm.
Um, I actually this is where I do use AI, and I say, "Poke holes in this argument," or what are my blind spots here? Or what am I not what am I not considering? And so that I can have a more fully formed thought and peace about it.
I love that. I love, "What am I not considering?"
Mm.
That's a great, just being able to see your blind spots. I love using, this latest generative AI, this latest version of AI that we all have that we're never gonna get rid of, to help research things and to quickly, um, just see your blind spots.
Mhm.
For brainstorming, it's an amazing tool. You know, if you're trying to write or compose something, whether it's a blog or an article or a post, for me, the process of brainstorming with the AI tool is, it's very efficient, and sometimes you can come up with, creative points of view that, it just would have been maybe days to get there on your own.
Mhm. Mhm. Which also isn't always a bad thing. I profiled, this woman named Saria Sood, who is the founder of Sublime, and Sublime is a second brain knowledge creation community platform. So it's basically anytime you read something that shifted your mindset on something, or read something that really stuck, or heard something, you can capture it and you can create a knowledge bank of these ideas, right? So it's a place to capture ideas, and then you can see other people's ideas that they're grouping into different categories, like things I want to write about, or how I'm thinking about leadership, or whatever it is. Okay, and you can share. It's an amazing platform. She just went live out of beta with 30,000 people on the wait list.
Wow.
And the way that she managed to do that was through building in public. She had the seed of this idea 10 years ago, and she was writing about it on Substack. She went viral writing about this idea, and then built the first iteration. That kind of flopped, and then built the second iteration. And she talks a lot about how a lot of times, like, really good ideas take a long time to form. Like, we really can't rush that process. And we are all trying to do that with AI, right? And I think it can help, but sometimes you also just need to go through that process of, like, ideating, getting an idea, struggling with it, right? Failing, that adversary, teaches you so much before you really fully come to the fully formed idea. And 10 years in the making. She was doing other stuff, obviously. She hasn't just been working on this problem, but she's been bringing people along for the ride, and now
Sure.
she's launching to a group of 30,000 people.
Well, seems
Um,
like it highlights your, point about Pixar's, rule about trying.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, the whole fact that she's been trying this whole time. I mean, if she'd have had the exact same product and it just came out of nowhere and it was the exact same product today, it probably wouldn't be nearly as popular
Yeah.
as this whole 10-year story.
Yeah. Trying. Yeah. Just being okay with some ideas, like, being slow to develop, fully forming them.
Well, speaking of, some of what you're seeing on LinkedIn and with other influencers and your ability to help them tell stories and be vulnerable, what are some of the things that you see, like, help us understand warmth, help us understand vulnerability, help us understand, like, it personified, like, if you can
Mhm.
think of people who are doing a really, really good job of it online.
Mhm.
People doing a good job of it to be productive, like, they're
Mhm.
doing it online, but they're also representing their organizations. It's not just an individual influencer or whatnot.
Right.
Can you think of anybody like that or mentors?
Yeah, I I really started digging into this piece of like what true vulnerability looks like and rawness and realness. And the common advice that you always hear is share from the scar, not from the wound, right? Have some perspective and then talk about your lesson. And this is an effective form of storytelling, but it's also sort of a tired form of storytelling, and it's not totally raw and vulnerable. And there were a couple of people who I started noticing that were truly just, to me, showcasing like so much bravery, just like these displays of courage on next level that I hadn't seen. That I was like, that is real raw vulnerability. And one of them is Marina Delano. She has an agency called Kalina Agency. She's a marketing agency, who works with startups in the tech space from 10 million and up. Um, she's been in it. She's been in it for 10 years. She's really successful, and she took to the internet, to YouTube, to LinkedIn. I think she's on Instagram as well, to talk about her struggles with mental health and how she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And so she openly talked about her diagnosis with a personality disorder, which, by the way, if you know anyone with BPD, the first thing is like it's so hard. The biggest thing about it is hard to be self-aware. So to even recognize and admit that it's something you have, it's like a version of narcissism. And then to admit it to the world on a public forum, I was just blown away. And she talked about it because it impacts her business, it impacts her relationships, and she thinks it's critically important that we talk about these things as we do business, so that we can do better business together. And it blew up. She got a big response on LinkedIn. She got a big response on YouTube. And I think so many people are like, wouldn't that damage her credibility? Isn't that, I mean, like, you're openly admitting that you have a hard time working with people because you have a personality disorder. Like, how is this impacting your business? And I reached out to her, said, how is business? About 9 months later. And she said, business has never been better. And that unlocked a completely new way of doing business for her. She's actually now, it's like part of her marketing approach with startups, with like B2B startups, is this like human emotional storytelling piece, that she uses to build brands and do content marketing plans. And yeah, I think I was really surprised by that answer. And several people I've reached out to, I'm like, who've shown these like courageous displays of like, they're not out of the mess yet. They're still in the mess. They're just talking openly about it, and maybe how they're navigating it or thinking about it, and ultimately just looking to connect over it and be open about it. Business has never been better.
Well, so I'm curious about that exercise all in its on its own. I mean, you are reaching out to these people who are big influencers online, very important, business people or whatever. Maybe it's your journalism background, but that in itself is kind of unique.
Mm.
Like, how are you able to build trust so quickly to where somebody who just, I don't know, I mean, maybe you send them an email, gave them a call, like, I don't know what it is, but like, tell us about that process because that we could all learn from that.
Yeah, anyone who I admire, um, who I follow, either they're writing, they have a Substack, or have a popular platform, I always reach out and tell them how much I admire their work. So the relationship always starts there. Or I tell them what resonated from a piece. And as someone who also creates a lot of content online, I write a newsletter. It is so meaningful when people do that, when there's a response to your work, right? And it's resonating, or you at least touched one person or helped unlock something for one person. And so doing that actually is a huge, um, they love it. First of all, on the other side, people love getting that feedback. And on your side, that's how you start to build a relationship. So,
That's a really good advice. Like, so for example, so if I notice that somebody's doing, really cool stuff, whether it's, like a passion project or business or whatever, If you say, man, one of these days I'd like to be able to like have a conversation with that person,
Mhm.
go ahead today and like come, like find a reason to like thank them or for making the impact or whatever, and just shoot them a little note.
Absolutely.
And that just sort of it's like a seed in the ground for the
Mhm.
future at some point, especially if they respond, because now
Mhm.
they have like a pseudo relationship with you,
Mhm.
and that way you could potentially connect more easily in the future. That's amazing.
Mhm.
That's a great it's a great tactic.
And I mean, and the second piece is if you're reaching out to somebody to ask them a question, say, I want to highlight you for what you're
Yeah.
doing or your work or your approach in my community, in my newsletter, with my clients, whatever. They're like, they love who wouldn't say yes to that? Yes, you want to spread the word about, my work and my platform. Thank you. Mhm.
That's really good advice. I'm gonna use that one. I'm definitely gonna use that one. Um, so, as we're getting into some of these pieces about story and about how you're helping others, you've mentioned it a couple of times about how, like how you see a really good use of AI, um, in the commoditization of some of these skills and these expert abilities. Like I actually think, just in talking with you, I actually think that you're not. I mean, it doesn't sound very commoditized what you're talking about. It is. There's a huge difference between somebody who's a mediocre storyteller like AI and
Mhm.
somebody who's a truly good storyteller. Someone that can really tap into that human experience and be relatable and really connect. I mean, you can go on Suno and generate a song in like 3 minutes, and
Mhm.
it's like, man, that kind of it sounds like Nashville a little bit, but then when
Mhm.
you dig into like the lyrics or whatever, it's empty, it's void.
Mhm.
But when you listen to a Clint Black song or whatever from like years ago, it's like, man, that really I feel like that's me,
Mhm.
you know?
It hits you, yeah, it speaks to your soul.
Right.
Mhm.
So how have you seen AI come into your space?
Mhm.
Where do you think it's going? And like, do we have a chance? Is it going to continue to get better to step on us eventually with our ability to tell stories?
I don't think it's ever going to be able to tell our stories. It can help us find our stories. It can help ask questions and help be a tool for reflection that maybe goes a little bit deeper or can help you get to a little bit more nuance or help you rework your intro so that it's punchy and it, piques curiosity and it creates that open loop. But I was telling you, Sam Altman just released a new version or is testing a new version of ChatGPT to do fiction writing and essays, creative writing. And he released the first output of this creative writing exercise where he asked it to write a piece about grief, and I forgot what the other element was. And he was so proud of it. He posted it on Twitter, and he got a huge response, mostly negative, from people being like, "I read halfway through this, and while like all the elements were right, and he hit the storytelling like beats. I'm calling it a he. Um, I stopped
Yeah.
reading. I didn't care because I know that there's no real experience of grief. You're talking about grief and experiencing grief, but it's a robot. It's not a human. It's not a human, and I'm totally uninterested. I'm not engaged. It's not, and so I I I don't see it replacing that in any way, shape, or form.
God, I hope so. I hope you're right. I
Well,
really hope you're right.
I think we were talking about the big debate over, M dashes and how you can spot AI writing on the internet, and people are all up in arms about it. And ultimately, it comes down to it's just because we want to know that something is human, and we're like struggling, we're grasping onto what it means to be human, right? Like we're all so worried about losing what it means to be human, and I think as long as we are human and need to connect with other humans, we're going to be able to do that through writing, through songs, through things that we create that maybe AI can create, but don't have the same value or worth to us because we know it's not rooted in the human experience.
I I sincerely hope you're right. I sincerely hope you're right. All right, so I'm gonna put you on the spot. I'm gonna ask you a hard question. What's your future story?
My future story. What do you mean by that?
Tell us your future story. Like, use all your techniques. Tell us what Renee's up to next and where you're headed and the impact you're gonna make.
Hmm. Hmm. um, oh, you're really putting me on the spot. Well, if I were to tell a story about where I'm going in the future, I would bring you to a moment in time where I'm really thinking about it. And actually, I was just in Mexico last week in an area between Cancun and Tulum where I grew up. And very few people can say they actually grew up in Cancun, but I lived in Cancun until I was 8. And we left um, because my dad died and my brother died and my mother faced all this tragedy. We faced all this tragedy as a family and we formed a new family and we just needed to leave that area. But as any person who grew up somewhere else and then is transported to a new culture, I always felt this like sense of belonging, this like pull to Mexico that I was like not quite American. I was raised in the South, but I wasn't really a Southerner. And, what does all mean? And now I'm coming back now, 39, almost 40, bringing my 2 kids who are 7 and 10, seeing if this place is still home, showing them a little bit of where I grew up, and thinking, actually, I've evolved beyond this. That was like part of my story, but now my story is in the Bay Area. But where's my story going to be in 10 years? And so I actually sat down to do this journaling exercise to look at myself 10 years from now and write down the day. What I'm having for breakfast, where I'm waking up, what's the view, what am I wearing, what's my hair like, you know, where are my kids, and going through that whole day to really envision that that future and like what actually the exercises to highlight like what actually matters to me right now and what moves am I making. And I saw myself living really a slow lifestyle in a place where there's lots of community, but not lots of technology. And I realized that the critical elements for me right now are our community and building like a really sustainable, slow sort of lifestyle. I'm nowhere near that yet, but that's sort of where I'm going. So through storytelling, I'm trying to build these intimate connections. I'm teaching more people how to do this. I'm now doing it through community. So I think that's really going to be the next chapter of my business is doing more of this storytelling through community and how essentially that just keeps us together as we're all so worried about what AI is going what it's stripping from us. So creating spaces where we're really feeling connected.
Well,
Um, yeah.
when you figure out where that place is, that slow place with lots of community, let me know because it sounds delightful. When I think about just I don't know, I mean, just a lot of us just our heads down, we're going from one thing to the next, and before you know it, the day's over, and then the week's over, and the
Mhm,
month's over, and the year's over, and it's just
mhm,
so fast, and I really do long for the time just looking at my own children, and I think about how slow life used to be when you were a little kid and you were, learning so much and everything was so cool and so new and so innocent. And I long for those days, and I at least I get to see a little bit of that, like hanging out with my little girls and my son. And anyhow, so I hope you figure it out and share when you figure out what it is. Where can we follow you? Where can we learn more about your journey and what's going on with you, Renee?
I'm really active on LinkedIn at Renee Frojo, and I have a newsletter called A Good Reputation, goodreputation.online, and that's where you can hear from me weekly.
Well, we'll definitely follow you there, and you can follow us anywhere where podcasts are found across the Bake More Pie social media feed and the Law of Relevancy social media feeds. Thank you for joining us, Renee.
Thank you so much.
It's been a great conversation. We'll see you next time.